This is The Long Road to Publishing, the podcast where we hear from authors who have traveled a long and bumpy road to publishing their books. Whether you're just starting out on your own writing and publishing journey, or if you're all too aware of the many possible detours along the way, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Eva Langston, author, writing instructor, and creator of Eva's newsletter for writers on Substack. Thank you so much for coming along on the ride. So the day I was supposed to talk to Amin Ahmad, I was sick and had literally lost my voice. My voice was completely gone for 4 or 5 days, which for a podcaster is quite terrifying. And I had to drink a lot of throat coat tea with a lot of honey before it came back, and I was able to reschedule with Amin and luckily caught him the day before he left on his book tour. And I'm so glad I was able to chat with Amin. He spent 15 years as an architect before chasing his fiction writing dreams. So we talk about his first foray into publishing crime novels under the name A.X. Ahmad, which did not go as well as he would have liked, and how he's finally back in the game with an exciting new novel. We also talk about teaching creative writing, and Amin explains how he writes his novels the same way he used to design his buildings. A quick reminder to subscribe to the podcast and share about it on social media or in real life. And now on with the episode. I considered calling it a holistic approach to author life because that's something Amin mentions, but it's not every day you meet a fiction writer with an architecture background. So I'm calling this one How an Architect Designs a Novel. Amin Ahmad worked as an architect before turning to fiction. He is the author of the novels A Killer in the Family, which is coming out in April, The Last Taxi Ride, and The Caretaker. His next novel, a murder mystery set in the fashion industry, is forthcoming from Holt in 2028. His short story collection, This Is Not Your Country, won the 2020 G.S. Chandra Prize. He created the Novel Year program at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland, taught at StoryStudio Chicago, and was the 2017 through 2019 Visiting Artist in Residence at Northwestern University. He now teaches creative writing to undergrads at Duke University and lives in Durham, North Carolina with his family and a very mischievous cat. When he's not writing, he can be found on his front porch, drinking tea and watching the world go by. So welcome to The Long Road to Publishing.
Thanks, Eva, and thanks for that nice introduction. It makes me sound like a real writer. About 10 years ago, so I was an architect with no writing resume, so it sounds good to me.
Oh, it sounds very legit. Yeah. And I was, we were talking a little bit before we started recording that we both, you used to teach at the Writer Center and I teach at the Writer Center, which is a fun connection. So before we get into your whole journey, which I am excited to hear about, I did read your book, A Killer in the Family, and I loved it. It was definitely a wild ride. I'm wondering if you can just give us the quick elevator pitch for listeners who might want to pick it up.
So, A Killer in the Family is about a young man from Mumbai, India. He's kind of a slacker, party boy, and he has an arranged marriage with the daughter of an ultra-wealthy Indian American family who have a real estate empire in New York City. And this guy, he's not really excited about his new bride. In fact, he thinks her sister is a little sexier, but he gets married anyway because it's a shortcut to a glamorous life. And he shows up in New York and he enjoys this new life that he's found with helicopter rides and trips out to the family estate on Long Island. But then he begins to realize something is really wrong with his new family, and maybe it has something to do with a notorious serial killer.
Yes. The thing that I thought was interesting about this book is I do feel like there's that trope in thrillers where it's like the person you're married to might not really be the person you thought they were. Like there's something I think deeply fearful to all of us who are married, like how well do I know this person? But then you add in the arranged marriage where he really doesn't know her very well at all when he gets married to her. So it's like, really? Who is this person? Who is this family that I've married into? So I thought that was a good twist on the trope.
Thank you.
Yeah, so okay, so when this episode comes out, actually, this book will be out in the world, but now we're going to go back in time and try to lead up to everything that's come before. I know you have this whole career as being an architect.
I guess I have a two-part question, which is, was there always a part of you that wanted to be a fiction writer? And then also, at what point did you decide you were going to pursue writing and trying to get books published?
I think a lot of writers were readers first. And I just spent my entire childhood reading. I just checked out of the real world and I would spend days and days in books. And I always wrote. I always wrote short stories. I always was thinking about stories. And I come from a family of real bullshit artists who lo love to tell stories. So that's what we do is sit around India in the 1970s, pre-TV, and tell stories. But the gap between me and being a writer or writing a book was so huge, right? Like I thought this is done by some other kind of people, not people like me. And I came to this country at 17 as an undergraduate, so I'm the immigrant, not my parents. And there was so much pressure on me to get a job and to get a job that pays. And I had a brief stint as a banker. Actually, I majored in economics. And then I was like, oh, I hate this. So let me do something that's creative but practical where I can get a paycheck. And I became an architect. I was an architect for 15 years and I sort of rose up to the ranks and I became a project manager. In my late 30s, early 40s, I found myself in these meetings wearing a suit and tie and like discussing contracts with lawyers. And I had come so far from living a creative life and I felt like I had lost my soul. So at that point, I said, okay, now, if I don't do this now, when will I do it? And I signed up for evening writing classes at an adult writing center. It was taught by a lady in her 80s who was a former lawyer who was very scary. And if she was pleased with the writing class, she would put out a bowl of carrots. And if she was not, there would be no carrots. So that's kind of how I started. My writing career was just around a kitchen table with a bunch of people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and some of whom are really good friends. And it's 20 something years later, and we're still chatting.
Wow, I can't get over the bowl of carrots
Yeah.
jokes. That's hilarious.
I mean, God bless her soul. She's no longer with us. So,
Yeah. Well, so were you always interested in writing thriller, mystery, crime novels? How did you get into that, or what did you start out with?
like, it's funny because I grew up in India again in the 70s and I read a lot of police procedurals, a lot of thrillers. That's what was there. It was like these paperbacks that came from America. It was either that or archaic British fiction, right? Like Kipling and Woodhouse on one end. So I grew up reading a lot of thrillers, but I started off writing really, really literary fiction, and people in my class would read it and say, "This is beautiful prose," and nothing happens.
Yep.
Guy goes back to India and inherits a house and just drinks a lot of tea and sits around and thinks about things. So I wrote several novels like that. And it was just for the pleasure of really writing it and of reconnecting with India and like visiting it in a fictional way. My wife finished her PhD in Boston and she got a fellowship in New York City. And so we moved there for a year, knowing it's a year in New York. And I quit my job as an architect and I wanted to find community. So a writing class I saw at the new school in New York was about writing suspense. And I'd never written suspense. I said, this is great for me because everybody's telling me I don't know how to write plot. And so I wrote 20 pages to get in that class, and the teacher was very encouraging, a lady called Katya Leaf. She was a published crime novelist, and she said, hey, this is good. You should keep going with this. So somehow I blundered my way through that book, and then I entered the world of suspense.
Okay, and then that's kind of been your path ever since, as you've been writing suspense novels.
I mean, I am interested in suspense as a device. My first two novels are like straight up like crime novels. Even then, I got it wrong because I put multiple timelines in there and I changed locations within the same series. So I was always trying to do something different. But I think suspense, writing in genre for writers of color is very liberating because it gives you a whole different landscape to operate in. Because when I
Mm.
first started writing, Jhumpa Lahiri had come out. She was from Cambridge. I'm a Bengali. She's a Bengali. She was writing stuff that was written in my neighborhood. And I was just like, oh, well, the immigrant story has been done. Like, how many stories do you need about like coming from India and cultural confusion? And you marry an American woman, and then your mom comes from India and like cooks smelly food. Like, that's all being done. And I was like, oh, where can I find space to write? And I found, using suspense is super, super helpful for that.
Yeah. Well, and of course, I feel like all novels should have suspense. Like, it's very smart that you kind of took the suspense class right away because no matter what genre you're writing in, you want the reader to keep turning the page. Okay, well, so tell me about, you had written a couple of novels where the character is drinking tea and thinking a lot, which I feel like we all have to sometimes get that out of our system first, right? So, and then tell me about, I guess, the first manuscript that you decided you were going to query agents with, and you were going to be like, okay, let me really pursue this.
I was taking this crime fiction class in New York, and I was in New York, and I knew I was there for like a year. And it was a very kind of precious time, and I was working on this crime fiction novel about a former Indian army captain who comes to America, and he becomes a caretaker on the island of Martha's Vineyard, and is taking care of this house for this politician, stumbles across a secret, and then is hunted. I wrote that novel when I was in New York, and a bunch of people from my class were like, "Oh, there's this pitch workshop where you can go and you can pitch editors, right? And
Hmm.
agents." So I went and did that workshop, and I pitched a young editor who was like, "Oh, this is great. If you finish this, send this to me." And then I ended up getting an agent, and then I ended up getting that very editor acquired the book. And when she met me, when we met for the first, she's like, "Oh, so nice to meet you." And I said, "No, we've met." She said, "We have." She had no memory of that meeting. And I think meeting her at that pitch workshop, something got embedded in her brain. And then when the manuscript came across her desk, she probably found a profound sense of familiarity or something and
Right.
acquired the book. I don't know. I think I just got super, super lucky. So that was kind of a sequence of events that would never have happened if I hadn't been in New York.
So when you decided that you were going to start querying this, did you put in the query letter, I've had editor interest?
I wish I'd been that smart. I was just really clueless. In fact, I did not want to know about the publishing industry. It scared me. It was so hard to figure out how to write a book. I said, I just wrote this thing. Let me just send it out. And I'd taken classes at Grub Street in Boston, which is a big writing center. And my writing teacher, Jenna Blum, who's a very kind person, introduced me to her agent. So I ended up having her as an agent. And I said, "Hey, can you put this editor on the list?" And that's how it all happened.
I see. Okay. Okay. A lot of times it's like people get the agent first and then they get the editor interest. So, getting the editor interest first, I'm just going to say for listeners out there, put that in your query letter.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, be smart about it. Yeah, that's something I want to talk about is definitely like learning the publishing industry. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then you had an agent, you had an editor. Which novel was this?
This was The Caretaker. Yeah.
Okay. And I believe this one you published under a pen name. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just use AX a mod. I thought it was cooler. Put an X in there. It's like, oh, this is a mystery guy. I had an inkling that I wanted to save like my name, I mean my full name for later. And just this was just something I was trying out. Maybe it wouldn't work.
So, yeah, well, then just tell me what happened next. How was that experience and what happened from there?
Yeah, it was to be honest, it was kind of awful.
Okay, tell me more.
So I wrote this crime novel, and I think it was a bit right before this wave of immigrant fiction. And so it was coming out in kind of the crime thriller space, which is a very mainstream white space. They didn't want to put anything Indian on the book. So if you see the cover of The Caretaker, it says The Caretaker, and then there's like a little Indian border. So they put it out there, and nothing really happened. And it was part of a two-book deal, so I wrote the second book, which is The Last Taxi Ride with the same character, and I turned it in. At that point, the publishing had kind of lost interest in this guy who wasn't selling too many books. And so the second novel came out, got a little bit of interest, like it was an NPR Best Mystery, stuff like that. But yeah, those two books kind of vanished, and I had my real taste of what being published was like. But it gave me a calling card. I said, okay, I published a couple of books, and it actually allowed me to start teaching writing. And it was supposed to be a trilogy. So by the time the second book came out, I had 80%, 90% of the third book in the Ranjit Singh series drafted on my hard drive. And my editor at the imprint was like, "Oh, this is, I think, your best one yet, but guess what? I'm leaving." So, and my agent was also leaving her agency. So, hey, I had no trilogy, no agent, and no editor. And if your book has not sold well, there's not going to be a new editor at the imprint who wants to pick up this series. So that's it. The book lives forever on my hard drive.
Oh, that's so sad. And then people who get invested and they're like, okay, where's the third book? And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, like
no, sorry.
give me $10, I'll send you a PDF.
Oh gosh. Okay. So your editor left and then your agent left the agency. Did that mean that you had to find a new agent or did you go with your agent to the new agency?
I did not at that point. I was just so beat up and so discouraged that I did not follow her to the new agency. And in fact, I just had no agent. I just had no agent. I said, I'm not engaging the publishing process again till I actually know what it is I'm doing, you know?
Mm.
And so for a long time, I had no agent, no publisher. I was teaching. I taught at the Writers Center. Then I taught at StoryStudio in Chicago, which is a Writers Center analog, great place in Chicago. And I also taught at Northwestern University. So I put a lot of my energy into my teaching and working on manuscripts and kind of having conversations with some agents, like, hey, what do you think of this idea? What do you think of this? So at that time, I probably wrote another three full manuscripts.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah. I wrote an entire manuscript about a kid who grows up in America, but he has a green card and he gets deported and sent back to India. And I just finished that, and the movie Lion came out, and I'd pitch it to agents, and they'd say like, "Oh, just like Lion, right? Like that's exact." I was like, "Ah, okay, all right." Then I went, I wrote another one. I wrote another one.
So in this time you're teaching, you're writing a lot of novels, you're maybe talking to some agents, but
Yeah.
nothing is really sticking. How were you feeling at that point? And I'm asking this in part because I'm also a writing instructor, and sometimes when I feel like things are really not going well for me in my own writing career, there's like a little bit of that, like, oh, what are my students going to think of me? Or, you start getting in your head. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but how were you feeling at this point in time?
I was out on a limb because I'd quit my career as an architect, right? We were really broke. My wife was a beginning academic. So we found the cheapest apartment we could find in DC. But I think having a really supportive partner is super helpful. My partner, she's an academic, she writes, and she's like, hey, this you like to write books, just keep writing books.
Yeah.
Keep doing it, you know. She's very steady. She doesn't go up, she doesn't go down, and she just said, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And without that, I could not really have survived. And my students at the Writer Center, I started the novel year class, a year-long novel writing class, and a fantastic group of people, just lovely people. And we just had so much fun, like workshopping novels and learning to write novels. So I felt like I was not publishing, but I had two books out. So I was not publishing, but I was able to, by teaching, sort of deepen my understanding of
Mm.
craft process. I felt my writing was getting better, and it felt really good to get out of my head. I think writers can get really in a deep funk and get kind of narcissistic. I'm guilty of that, definitely. And just by being of service to other people and lovely people, just really fun, creative individuals. We ended up having a giant dinner together, ended up hanging out. A bunch of those people ended up being in my writing group. I think there's something special about writers in DC, unlike writers in New York, where you throw a brick and you like hit 10 writers, right? Like DC writers of fiction are few and far between. So when you meet a fellow writer, people are very welcoming and very kind. And I got so much support from people.
Yeah. Well, and I know when I teach at the Writers Center, also, I think something about DC writers is a lot of people are coming to it from a previous career, like you,
That's right.
where, a lot of people have had this whole storied, interesting career in some totally different,
Yes.
thing. And then they're coming to fiction and bringing that to their fiction. Well, and I think too, what you said about teaching writing helps you deepen your craft. I totally see that where you're maybe trying to teach something about point of view. So you start looking for examples and then you start breaking down the examples for yourself and you gain a deeper understanding that you then pass on to your students.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. When I just stumbled into writing and I got this book deal and I just stumbled through it and I didn't know what I was doing. And your example about point of view is spot on because there's so many different points of view when you start researching it, right? And who in real life as a writer, you have this pressure to write. So you just, oh, I have to just write my books, right? And you don't have time to do research out of that. But as a teacher, you have permission to take that time. You're getting paid for it, hopefully.
Yeah.
And and you owe it to your students. And I think once you learn something and you can pass it on, it becomes part of your DNA as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So then I'm curious to know at what point did you start working on A Killer in the Family?
So I started Killer in the Family on the heels of another failed novel. So I wrote a novel about a surrogate mother who carries a baby for an American couple and then comes to DC to steal her baby back. I worked for that for 4 years, got an agent for that. And my agent was like, this is very thrillery. Do you mind if we work to revise it to make it more of a mainstream kind of novel? And I was like, sure. So we worked on it for 2 years and going back and forth with drafts of novels. And at the end of it, it just was a Frankenstein mess.
Mm.
Just was not working. And it was heartbreaking because I'd put so much work into it. My agent was very kind and she was like, yeah, I can go out with this if you want, but like, you got anything else? And I said, yeah, I got this idea for what became Killer in the Family. And she was like, okay, write that. I can sell that. So now I'm going into this with a big failed novel, but I've learned so much from that that I was like, okay, I'm never going to go in without a plan of action. So I kind of changed my writing style, and I'm happy to talk about that as well. I spent a lot of time planning the novel, lot of time, and then I wrote it in about 9 months, like real butt in chair, like 6 to 8 hours a day. In fact, I ruined my back
Oh no.
doing that. But I was just like, okay, this one's got to make it, right? There's just been so many years of things not working. But also, those years of things not working, I had acquired so many tools at this time. I felt like, you always get lost in a novel. There are periods where you're in the doldrums or you're stuck. But this time I was like, oh, I've been here before. And I know I can get out of it. And so I wrote that in about 9 months, butt in chair. And, my agent read it, made some really, really great edits, but not a lot of edits. And then I have two editors, one in the US, one in the UK, and they gave me some edits. And it was mainly about like continuing plot lines that had been dropped or some characters. So the patriarch of the family and in The Killer in the Family, Abbas Khan, he has a wife named Coco, and she just vanished from the page because I just forgotten about her. And so I went back and I developed her plot line throughout the novel and things like that. But it came together really quickly with momentum, and I felt like, oh, this is when you write a novel in one coherent sort of push. It has a flow to it and it has an energy to it.
Mm-hmm. You said you changed your writing style. I do want to hear about that. How did you change your writing style for this one?
So when I was an architect, I worked on really complex design projects. And when I moved into writing, people were like, "Oh, writing is so hard, and it requires so much pain. And if you're not like an alcoholic, like Hemingway, the book's no good." And people always had writer's block. They were like, "Oh, I have writer's block. I can't write. I have writer's block." And I was like, "Architects never get architect's block. Like,
Right.
work and do it." And then I realized it's because architects have a very clear design process. They have stages of design, and at the beginning stage of the design, you can produce something that's really messy and that's really exploratory and can fail, and you just get information from that. And once you have a model that works, you keep iterating on that model and developing it, and then you actually do the construction drawings down the line. So I said, let me model my writing process on that. So I wrote like 100, 150 pages without worrying about it too much and just used different POVs, different voices, made a big mess, then went back and started writing a whole novel, but on index cards, like one scene per index card, and made my way through the whole novel. And then I had a tiny stack of index cards, and then I took that and I developed each scene, and that maybe one index card became five index cards for this scene. So I had a big stack of index cards, but it's kind of scary. I was like 9 months into this thing, like no, say about 6 months into this thing of preparation. And all I had was a bunch of index cards and a Microsoft Word file. But then when I actually sat down to write it and I blasted through in like a 9 month period, I had a very good scaffolding. And I won't say outline, it was a scaffolding because it just oriented me. But I still made a lot of discoveries and changes in the writing.
Yeah. So before you hadn't really done a lot of planning ahead of time.
Yeah, I've been so eager to jump into the book and to just like, oh, let me just write it. I really want to write it. I want to be a writer. And I would just make these real messes, and then you'd have to like re-engineer it, and it was like fighting with the sillier, like stupider version of yourself. So I think since then I've just learned a lot.
Yeah.
That's how I'm wired. I think it's not one size fits all. There are a lot of people who need to just write their way through it and make their discoveries in the writing. I'm just like I like to use my hands, and I like different colored pens and different colored index cards and going to Staples and buying a bunch of stuff. And so when you write a novel on index cards, and I have different colored index cards for different storylines or different characters, and I just lay it out on my desk, and I can actually like almost like a movie, like see my novel, see how it flows, and like, oh, this part's not working. Pull out this index card, I'll cut this or move this. So I actually play with my index cards. And that just works for me because that's just how I'm wired as an architect.
Yeah. To your point, everybody has to do what works for them. But I do think when people are just starting out, it's good to try different methods and like, let me try this index card method because the novel is so big. And I think sometimes it's so hard for us to kind of keep hold of everything, And so maybe that tactile,
Yeah. Yeah.
thing works for you, or maybe you find something else that works for you.
You can do an outline with bullet points. You can use post-it notes up on your wall. Some people I know have like a string and they clip things, pieces of paper to it
Oh,
with
I like
quotes.
that.
I think, but what I've learned from talking to a lot of my writer friends is at some point you can write a bit, then create an outline, and then write the novel, or you can write hundreds of pages and then go back and outline from the material you've created. But at some point, you have to create a facsimile of your novel. That's a plan, right?
Yeah.
It's impossible to hold an entire novel in your head, right? At least I can't.
Well, and I think what for me is often different books, I need a different, I have to do it differently.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, I do think I sometimes am so excited to get started that I need to spend a little bit more time in that brainstorming and planning process than I do. But yeah, it's hard. Every book is a different beast, I think.
No, no, exactly. And the thing that the term I use when I'm teaching my undergrads, and I'm finishing up teaching a novel writing course, which is kind of a crazy thing to do in one semester. And my students have written a full outline for their novels, and the first 50 pages is that you have to have gas in the tank. Like if you don't have gas in the tank, you're not going to make this long journey. And that gas can be like a lot of research, like notes on dialogue, some kind of outline. You really have to have a lot of material in there. I mean, I think some writers call it mulch. I prefer gas in the tank because it's a more dynamic metaphor.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I kind of hold my students back from writing and until they've done exploratory sketches and outlined a bit and done research and now with the internet it's so much fun because one of my assignments is kind of make like a Pinterest like mood board for your characters and the world and all that kind of stuff. What's your playlist, and all that stuff feeds into creating material.
I don't know if you've seen this. It used to be on Twitter and now I think it's on Blue Sky. It's a movie poster pitch event where you
Oh,
make like the movie poster for your book. But yeah, all of that sort of stuff. Sometimes I go back and forth of like, oh, is this, just me avoiding writing? But I do think that you're right. It's getting you excited. It's getting that gas
yes.
in the tank. It's getting those images that could inspire you.
And now with the internet, I mean, it's just an incredible amount of research you can do. I had a student of mine who was writing something set in a morgue, and they found a website that was like a blog by like mortuary people who work in
Oh,
morgues.
interesting.
One of the details is that it smells of apples because they use apple scented shampoo to shampoo the hair of the corpses or something like that. Or maybe yeah, it was a morgue slash funeral home, I guess. But and just that detail made like the story kind of come alive. So I think there's just so many resources out there that we as writers is incredible. Anything you want to know, you can find out on the internet.
Yeah.
Of course, the downside is you can go down research rabbit holes and then just spend weeks and weeks doing that. So there's got to be I keep telling people your novel kind of will live and die on like the emotional truth of it. And once if you get that right and you get a few details wrong, people will forgive you, but not the other way around. So make sure it's working emotionally.
Yeah, I'm not as much of a researcher, but I know some people will spend a long time in that research process. And I feel like giving yourself a time limit, like I'm going to research this for however much time, this much time, then I'm just going to start writing. And any questions that come up along the way, you make a note of it and you can always, fill that detail in later. But I think you're right. It's at the end of the day, people are reading for the emotional journey and the character arc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, I want to go back. This is kind of a random question, but you mentioned about writing your novel, you hurt your back. I'm wondering if you have gotten a different setup now with your computer that is more back friendly.
I actually have a decent chair now and a backrest, and I set my my alarm for an hour, so I have to get up and I have to walk around. I mean, I think because sitting here, we just get lost in our heads. I'm when I'm deep into writing, I'm not here. I don't know where I am, but I am not here. I mean, my daughter could come in and say the house is on fire, and I say, "Lovely, sweetie, I'll be with you in 5 minutes." Like, it's like I'm not even here. So yeah, so I think that so much of like writing is eventually you realize it's sort of in the body. And to have a career as a writer, you really have to, you can't neglect the body, which is I'm very guilty of doing that because I live in my head so much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's something we've never brought up on the podcast, but I feel like it's an important point because, yeah, if you're really in the flow and you're, hunched over your computer, I am partially asking because a couple of years ago, I was having really bad like neck and shoulder pain. And I think it was because I was working on my laptop and I was all like hunched over
Yes.
and I had to totally change my setup. I have a desk that has kind of a shelf so that and a monitor. So the monitor sits up higher. And then I have the, wireless mouse and keyboard so I can like actually sit upright instead of being hunched over my
Yes.
laptop. And it's totally made a difference. I'm always like, oh my gosh, this is what I've needed to be doing for years. But yeah, also like getting up and stretching and it's like good to be in the flow, but then you get up hours later and you're like, oh,
Then it'll kill you.
yeah.
Yeah, as my wife always says, like sitting is the new smoking. It's like it's just like,
I love that. I had not heard that, but
yeah.
yeah, that is
My,
true.
my next step is just to get an extension so I can have a standing desk. And I'm so superstitious about my writing process. Like I'm in my study with all my books and my toys. I collect old toys. And
Oh,
I'm
cool.
kind
Oh,
of,
yeah, I can see a few of them back there,
yeah,
I
and
think. Yeah.
I'm surrounded by like all my stuff, and this is kind of where I do a lot of my writing. So I'm always like loath to change anything. Should something oh maybe I won't be able to write, but I think it's overdue the change. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you'll have to let me know about the standing desk. I've never tried a standing desk before. Yeah, it's one of the hazards of being a writer is you gotta figure out how to keep your body and your back healthy, I guess.
To be serious is like people think writing, I mean, you meet people like who say, "Oh, I'm gonna write a book when I retire," or like, "I'll write a book one day." Like I have all these great ideas. It's really hard work. It's really hard work. And in fact your brain like burns through so much energy. And I'll be like, yeah, after like 4 or 5 hours of like writing, and that's a long day for me. I'm just I'm toast. I need a nap.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we've talked a little bit about you teaching undergraduates, but is there anything else to say there about, what are some things you tell your students or I don't know, something that might be surprising about teaching writing to younger students?
Yeah, I think especially with my undergrads, I teach at Duke, which is it's a competitive place. And the kids who come are very smart, very ambitious, and they want to ace everything. And coming into a novel writing course is an exercise in learning how to fail.
Yeah.
That you have to embrace failure because failure is your way to learning things. You're going to have this golden story in your head, and then you're going to write it, and it's not going to be very good. Because that's what a first draft is. And then you're going to rewrite it like 5 times, and then you're going to make it better and better. And that's something that's alien to them because most of that learning is learning how to ace things and just get an A. And so it's distressing and it's hard work for them to come into writing. But I think people who come from like the sciences and hard sciences and computer science and business, and it's also wonderful because they can tap into their own creative sides. So they come to it as like, oh, I'm gonna go do some therapy with writing, and then there's this guy talking about failure and how hard it is, and it's really hard. And I'm so proud of my students because they learn how to do those not very good drafts and to push through it. And so it becomes a class about writing, but also about learning how to fail, and also that creativity is iterative. It's not linear. You just don't sit down and blast something brilliant out. Like you have to iterate and you have to get it better and better and better.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is, and I think a lot of, I don't know, maybe I'm generalizing here, but a lot of us who grew up reading and, maybe wanted to be writers, we kind of have that A student mentality where we want to, get the A and we want to and writing and publishing especially really challenges that because
Mhm.
it's not you do the assignment and you get an A, it's you do the assignment and then you do it over and over again and then maybe you get published and maybe you don't, maybe you have to start all over. So it really does kind of challenge that whole notion.
Yeah, that's right. And it's just so hidden, right? Because you're doing it alone in a room, working, working, working. And then the expectations from outside, from your family, from your friends, right? If you say, "Oh, I'm an accountant," they're like, "Oh yeah, have I heard of you? Are you like the best accountant?" But if you're a writer, people are like, "Oh yeah, have I heard of you? What have you published? Have you been on Oprah?" It's like
Right.
completely different, completely different level of humiliation. So there's that as well. But I came from architecture, and architecture is a very strange field because until you're in your 50s, you don't know anything. It's a very complex thing to build different kinds of buildings, and it's a apprentice model. So you go and you work with an architect or a firm that you think is the top of their field, and you apprentice there and you learn. And you walk in there and you're like you have to be very humble. You work long hours. It's pretty abusive, actually, the whole architecture culture. So I kind of came from that. So I had a bit of a thick skin, and I was like, I'm not gonna get thrown by this. I've already been through this in a way. So that helped as well.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go back to something you said earlier. You were talking about being a person of color and finding a place in genre.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about maybe any challenges you've faced with finding readers or finding a publisher being an author of color.
I think the readers are out there. There are tons of readers. There are readers of color. The real challenge is that the publishing industry is totally white. The agents are all white. Editors are all white, and they have certain ideas about what will work in the marketplace or what an Indian novel should be, right? So it's like threading the eye of the needle to get to the other side, to get to the readers. Whenever I've had a book come out, and even with my two crime novels that kind of vanished, but I went to the Brooklyn Book Festival and I did two events there in separate years. And that was the place where I had a long line of people waiting to get my book signed. I was shocked. And people were like, "Oh yeah, we've been waiting for this. We want kind of an Indian action hero, like all
Yeah,
this."
yeah.
So I think the real challenge is the industry itself. And at one point there was sort of overtures made to diversity, and they brought in a lot of people from outside, people of editors of color. And I think a lot of those people are gone. Either they've left
Mm,
or been fired with consolidations, and the few people who hang on are like doing the good work. So I think that's the real challenge as a writer of color. And I think that's why writers of color, I think, are now doing a lot of innovative stuff in fantasy and sci-fi, because that's a completely open space. And I think it's a super progressive space, as is like YA fiction, not funnily enough, but it makes sense that this is a generational shift. But I do think that other genres are still pretty traditional. That being said, like uh, media is changing. If you look at what's on Netflix and you look at the kind of things that people are consuming. Riz Ahmed has a new series out on Netflix called Bait. The large parts of it are spoken in Hindi or Urdu with no subtitles. It's doing great. People are into like all the Korean stuff. So the media is changing, but publishing is still, they want to stick with what's tried and tested.
yeah. Well, and I think I heard some analogy that like publishing is like a huge cruise ship and it's not like a little speedboat that can make a quick turn and go in a different direction. It's like it's going to take a really long time to turn that ship around or get it
Yeah,
going in a different direction. And
yeah.
so, yeah, I think, it moves slowly in all ways, including sort of what you're talking about.
And I'm just I was kind of laughing as you said that, because sometimes I check out my students' resumes on LinkedIn. They'll be like, "Hey, I did this, whatever. Like check me out." The word that everybody uses, I'm very agile. Like you have to be agile and pivot. Like people are always pivoting all over the place. Like we're
Just
living in a
pivoting all
world
over the place.
of tech and disruption and being agile and pivoting, and there's publishing, the stately cruise ship, just like sailing towards the icebergs. It's just like,
Right, right. Which ironically, they do always tell authors, like, you need to be able to pivot. So it's like, oh, we authors have to be able to pivot. We have to be the speedboats.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, but it sounds like, and I'm guessing here, but did you get a two-book deal for A Killer in the Family and the book that's coming out next?
I did. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, it takes a lot of pressure off to have a book already under contract and not to have to go through that whole process again, which is really harrowing. And I have a great editor at Holt, Retha Powers, who's super, super supportive. And so that feels really, really great. There's always the fear of having a two-book deal, and as happened to me before, I had a two-book deal before, and the first book didn't fly. And then your second book is like a zombie book.
So everybody listening, go buy A Killer in the Family. You will love it. It is, like I said, it really is a wild ride and it's a lot of fun. Well, okay, so we're getting kind of close to the end, and one of the things I always like to ask is what is something that has surprised you on your whole writing and publishing journey? And it can be a good surprise or a not so good surprise or one of each.
I think the good surprise is how kind writers can be. Writers are very, very kind people, and the kind of support I've got from my writing friends has just been incredible. I've been surprised by that. I think it's the community aspect of it that I really love and I cherish. And the writing allows you to go out there and meet people. When I have a book coming out now, I've already met a whole bunch of people, including you.
Yeah.
And now we're like, oh, we're both writing teachers and we're connected, and maybe we'll do something down the line. So that's the lovely part about the writing process. The not so lovely part is that I'm always shocked at how writers put their heart and souls into their books, and how careless the publishing industry can be with your book, right? Because it's a juggernaut. And they might have paid you money for your book, but that doesn't mean they're gonna learn how to package it right or promote it right. I'm always shocked by that. I'm always shocked by how careless. It's not personal. It's not personal. It's just like, yeah, we have so many books and we're overwhelmed and like whatever. And that's just built into the industry. The good news is that authors have social media at their disposal now, so they can kind of reach out directly to the marketplace, to readers. I'm kind of learning those ropes. I think that's empowering for writers, and I think writers cannot sit around and wait for the publishing industry to do the right thing. They have to be super, super active and invest their money and their energy into kind of building themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do know that, a lot of, well, I don't know about a lot of writers, but there are some writers today, oh, I don't want to have to do all of that social
Yeah.
media. And, I wish that the publisher would do it for me. But on what you're saying is it puts some control back to you, or it puts at least a sense of control back to you. Like there is something back in the day, you really didn't have any options, really.
Oh, when my first two books came out, there was not this extent of social media. This is some Facebook. You really felt powerless. Yeah, and I would just add here that I think it's important to think about writing holistically, not just publishing, but like leading the life of a writer, right? Having a writing group, going to things, going to lectures, going to conferences, like networking with other writers, having an expectation of being a big name best-selling author is that's an aberration. A lot of stars have to align, but I'm very happy with my tiny writing life and my students and my teaching and my writing, and it's a real privilege to be able to spend time on my own writing. I'm not on a construction site, so I would say to people, like, think about it holistically and not just like, oh, some kind of exterior success. You have to define success for yourself, otherwise you'll drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the idea of it's a holistic, you're reading, you're going to writer events, you're taking yourself to a museum to get inspired. You're doing,
Yeah,
kind of all of the things that encompass being a
yeah.
writer. Yeah. Well, I end every episode with a tip for the road, which can be a tip about writing or publishing, or maybe some tip that you give to your students. But what's a final tip you would like to impart to us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I was just talking about this with my students. I see so many talented writers, first-time writers who are writing their first novel or maybe their second novel, and they want the validation of the marketplace. So they finish a draft and they send it out too early. and then they get rejected, and then they get discouraged, and then they might not write again. And my tip for your listeners is that when you finish a manuscript, treat it as the discovery draft, because that you've discovered the story. And often the first draft will have big lumps of backstory because you got deep into something. There'll be events that don't move as fast as you like. Maybe the entry point to the novel, the exciting part of it, is 10 pages in or 50 pages in. So take a break after you finish the draft. Do not hit send and send it out to 50 agents or 100 agents, which it's easy to do now. And
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the lottery, it's not a lottery, it's a business. So take some time off, come back to it with fresh eyes, and then rewrite it another 3 times and make it as good as you can. Send it out to beta readers, friends who read a lot in that genre. And then do your research before you go out to agents. Like, do not look to the marketplace for validation or for feedback, or like, oh, I'll just send it out and some agent will tell me what's wrong with my novel. That's not their job. You're just going to get back a form letter. And it's so sad because I've really seen a lot of talented writers get discouraged by rushing things.
Yes, definitely. 100%. I had this problem when I started out. I see lots of people, the querying too soon, sending things out too soon. And still now when I finish a manuscript, I'm usually either like, I love this. I can't see anything wrong with it. It's amazing,
Right.
or I hate it. One of the two. But then I have to like put it away for 2 months, and then you come back to it and you see all of these glaring, oh, the pacing here, oh, this doesn't make sense, that I just didn't see when I first finished it. And you really have to take that time away. And I think you're right. Like there's so much, we live in a society that there's so much need for that external validation, that there is that like, oh, I gotta get it out there right now so I can get the validation, but not a good idea.
Not definitely not a good idea. That the agents in the market do not exist to validate you. They exist to publish books which are highly polished products.
Yes,
So yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And if you need validation, I mean, this is the thing is I think like if you're a novelist, like write short stories in your downtime, send them to literary magazines, send them out, get them published. There's so many websites because we can't live forever waiting for that final thing to happen. So do a reading at an open mic somewhere. All those things are great and help you to connect with people and reduce the isolation.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And yeah, I know you're getting ready to go off on tour and promote the books. I hope that goes really well.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thanks for listening to The Long Road to Publishing. Many of the books we discuss on the podcast can be found at my bookshop shop, the link for which is in the show notes. My guests' books and many of the resources we discuss on the show can also be found in the show notes. You can find me online on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Substack with the handle Eva Langston. Even better, subscribe to my free newsletter for writers at evalangston.substack.com and feel free to send me an email. The podcast address is longroad.pub@gmail.com. The Long Road to Publishing is produced and edited by me, Eva Langston, and the intro-outro music comes from the artist's sound roll on Upbeat. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and I'll be back soon with more publishing stories and more tips for the road.